I want to start by saying something that might sound strange. I'm not angry. I thought I would be by the time I got to the part where I told this story out loud. I thought there'd be some fire left in me, some heat. But what I feel, mostly, is tired. A good tired. The kind you feel after you've carried something very heavy for a very long time and you finally set it down, and now you're sitting on the side of the road just breathing, just looking at your hands. I'm 70 years old. I left my marriage 8 months ago. And I know what you might be thinking. 70? You waited until 70? Yes, I did, and I'm not going to spend this whole story being ashamed of that, but I am going to tell you the truth of it, all of it, or as much as one woman can hold in one sitting. So let me start at the beginning. His name was Gerald. We met at a church social in 1974. I was 22 years old. He was 25. He had on a brown suit that was a little too big for him in the shoulders, and he brought me a cup of punch without being asked. And I thought, this man notices things. This man pays attention. That was it. That was the whole reason. A cup of punch. I know. He was charming back then, and I don't say that the way people say it now, like charming is a warning sign. He was genuinely warm. He made people laugh. He remembered names. He asked my mother about her garden every single time he came to the house, and she loved him. Lord, my mother loved Gerald. She used to say, "Miriam, that man is solid. That man is the kind you keep." And I believed her, because mothers know, don't they? Except for all the times they don't. We dated for 2 years. Got married in June of 1976. I wore a dress I sewed myself because we couldn't afford the kind I wanted, and honestly, the dress was beautiful. I was beautiful. I remember standing at the back of that church thinking, I am so ready to start my life. And I was. I was just starting a different life than I imagined. Now, I want to be careful here because I don't want to do what people do sometimes when they look back, where everything becomes a sign, everything becomes a clue, and you make it sound like the whole thing was obvious from day one. It wasn't obvious. That's not how these things work. But there were moments, small ones. The first time I really noticed something, we'd been married for maybe 4 months. I'd made a pot roast for his family, his mother, his 2 brothers, a sister-in-law, and I was proud of that pot roast. I had called my aunt 3 times to get the recipe right, and when everyone sat down and started eating, Gerald looked at his mother and said, "It's not quite like yours, Mama, but she's trying." Just like that, in front of everyone. His mother looked at me with a face that said, "I'm sorry," and I looked at my plate and I told myself he didn't mean anything by it. He's just close to his mother. That's not a bad thing. And that's how it starts, isn't it? Not with something so terrible you can't ignore it, with something just small enough that you can. We didn't have language for it back then. We didn't sit around talking about emotional intelligence or love languages or boundaries. Lord, nobody said boundaries. You would have gotten a very strange look if you'd walked into a room in 1978 and started talking about your boundaries. Back then, we just called it marriage. We called it, that's how men are. We called it, you have to work at it. And I believed all of that. I believed it the way you believe things when that's all you've been given to believe. So I worked at it. For 47 years, I worked at it. People think these things happen in big moments, big fights, big betrayals. And sometimes they do. But for me, and maybe for some of you listening, it was smaller than that. It was quieter. It was the way he corrected me in public. Not cruelly, that's the thing. It wasn't like something out of a movie where your faith is wrong. I'm telling you that sometimes we use faith the way we use anything else we love, as a reason not to look at the thing that's hurting us. At 40, you think you still have time. You tell yourself, it'll get better. It's a rough season. We'll come out the other side. At 60, you start to negotiate differently. You say, okay, maybe it won't be great, but it's familiar, and familiar is safe. And at 70, something else happens. At 70, you start counting. Not time in an abstract way, not I have years ahead of me, but actual mornings, actual quiet hours, actual cups of tea made exactly the way you like them, with no one to comment on how you made them wrong. You start counting how many of those you might have left, and the number starts to feel urgent in a way it never did before. If you're listening, I'm gonna stop here for a second, because if you've made it this far in this video, I don't think you're watching by accident. Maybe you're in something that looks like what I'm describing. Maybe it's not identical. These things never are. But if something I've said has sat a little funny in your chest, if you've recognized a feeling even when you didn't recognize the story, please don't push that away. Don't explain it away the way I explain things away for 47 years. I'm not telling you what to do. That's not my place. But I am asking you, think about it. Sit with it. And if you're still here and these stories feel like yours, subscribe to this channel. These aren't just my stories. They belong to a lot of women, a lot of people. And maybe hearing them said out loud will give somebody the permission they've been waiting for. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. People always expect this part to be dramatic, a fight, a moment of humiliation so severe it finally trips some wire. And I understand why. That's how it happens in movies. That's a clean, cinematic reason to leave. Mine wasn't like that. Mine was a Tuesday morning in March. I was washing dishes, which, after 47 years, I still did by hand because Gerald didn't trust the dishwasher to actually clean anything. And my granddaughter, Amara, was sitting at my kitchen table. She's 8. She had spent the night, which she does sometimes, and she was eating cereal, and she was watching me, the way children do, just quietly watching. And she said, "Grandma, why do you look sad?" And I said, "I'm not sad, baby. I'm just thinking." And she said, and I will hear this until I die, she said, "You always look like that, like you're waiting for something bad." 8 years old. 8 years old, and she could see what I had learned not to see in myself. I didn't cry right then. I finished the dishes. I made sure she got off okay when her mother came to pick her up. I stood at the door and waved, And then I went back inside and I sat down at that kitchen table and I looked at that room, that kitchen I'd cooked in for 31 years, those curtains I'd sewn, those chairs I'd reupholstered twice. And I thought, I look like I'm waiting for something bad. And I was. I had been waiting for something bad for so long that it had become my face. It had become my posture. It had settled into my body like weather. That was the moment. Not a screaming match, not a breaking dish. My 8-year-old granddaughter seeing me clearly enough to ask a simple question. I should also tell you about the doctor's appointment, because that matters too. About 6 months before I left, I went in for a regular checkup, and my doctor, a woman I trust, she's about 50, sharp as anything, she asked me how I was doing, not physically, how I was doing, and I started to answer the way I always answered, fine, tired, getting older, you know. And she looked at me and said, Miriam, are you happy? And I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I sat there on that crinkly paper on that examining table in that little room, and I could not answer the question. Not because I was too sad to speak, because I genuinely did not know. I had not checked in on my own happiness in so long that I didn't have access to the answer. She didn't push. She just let the silence sit there. And eventually I said, I don't think I've thought about that in a while. She gave me some information, a number to call if I ever needed to talk to someone. She didn't make it into a big thing, but she planted something. And between Amara's question and that doctor's silence, something started to move in me. Something slow, like the way ice moves in late winter, barely visible, but moving. I want to be honest, I didn't decide to leave and then leave. That is not how it went. I thought about it for months. I prayed about it. I talked to one person, my friend Celeste, who has known me since 1971, and who, it turns out, had been watching me shrink for 30 years and waiting for me to be ready to talk about it. She didn't say much when I finally told her. She just took my hand and said, "It's about time, Miriam." That's all. Just that. I spoke to my daughter Yvette. That was one of the hardest conversations of my life, harder than leaving in some ways, because my children had grown up in that house, in that story, and asking them to see it differently was asking them to look at their whole childhood through a different window. Yvette cried, but she also said, "Mama, we've all been worried about you." I didn't know that. I truly did not know that. Gerald and I had some conversations. I won't go into the details of that. Those moments belong to us, and I don't have any interest in playing them back here. I'll just say he was not pleased. There was anger. There was a period of bargaining. Things will be different. I'll do better. Let's try counseling. And I sat through all of that, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Steady. I felt steady, like something in me had finally picked a direction and nothing was going to redirect it. After 47 years of being uncertain, of second-guessing, of measuring my own feelings against everyone else's comfort, I felt for the first time completely sure about something. I wanted to leave. Not because I hated him. I want to be clear about that. I didn't hate Gerald. I don't hate Gerald now. He is a complicated man who moved through the world in ways that were often unkind, and I think he knows that, somewhere in him. And I spent too many years making myself smaller in service of his comfort. But he is not a monster. I don't have a monster story. I have a very ordinary, very painful, very human story about two people who were not right for each other, and one of them who took too long to say so out loud. I moved into an apartment in September. It was smaller than I wanted, and the bathroom needed work, and the first week I was there, the woman upstairs walked in heels all morning, and I lay in bed listening to her and thinking I could call Gerald right now and this whole thing could be over. That's real. I want you to know that's real. Leaving doesn't feel like freedom right away. It feels like standing outside in cold air after being indoors for a very long time. There's a sharpness to it. It's good for you probably, but it's not immediately comfortable. I cried. I want to be honest about that too. I cried in that apartment ways I hadn't cried in years, because for years I had trained myself not to cry in front of him, because tears made him impatient or gave him something to criticize. And now there was no one watching, and something in me just let go. The grief I had been compressing for decades came out at strange times, in the shower, at the grocery store once. I was standing in the cereal aisle, my old hiding place, and I started crying because I was choosing cereal just for myself, and I didn't know what kind I liked. I had always bought what Gerald wanted. I stood there for 10 minutes reading the backs of cereal boxes. I bought 3 kinds. I ate all of them at different times. One of them I didn't like at all, and I threw the box out. And I laughed. I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen about cereal. And that laugh felt like something coming back to life. I'll be honest with you about the practical things too, because nobody talks about this part. At 70 years old, I had to learn things that most people learn in their 20s. I had to figure out online banking. Do you know how long it took me to understand how to pay a bill online? I called my grandson Marcus 4 times in 1 week. That poor child. He was very patient. He only sighed loudly twice, which I thought was admirable. I had to learn how to call the landlord myself when something broke, how to set up my own utilities, how to figure out a budget, a real budget for my real life, just mine. It was terrifying, and it was embarrassing, and there were moments where I thought, I am too old for this. People my age should not have to learn how to be adults for the first time. And then I thought, yes, but you are doing it, and that turned out to be enough. The first peaceful night of sleep I had in that apartment, I mean truly peaceful, where I didn't wake up once, where I didn't lie there reading the ceiling, where I just slept, that was about 3 weeks in. I woke up in the morning and the light was coming through the curtains I'd just hung, and there was no sound except the woman upstairs with her heels, which I had by then decided was charming rather than annoying. And I lay there and I felt quiet, just quiet all the way through. I hadn't felt that in a long time, maybe before I was married. That kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, it's space, space that belongs only to you. I burned dinner twice in the first month, not from any dramatic distraction, but because I kept forgetting there was no one to hurry for. I would be reading or watching something on television, and I'd forget I had something on the stove because I'd lost track of time, and losing track of time was something I hadn't allowed myself to do in 47 years. You're always tracking time when you're managing a household around someone else's moods, always aware of what time he gets home, what time dinner needs to be ready, what kind of energy is going to walk through that door. And now no one was coming, and I could let the time go soft. I burned the dinner. I opened a can of soup. I sat on my little couch in my little apartment, and I ate my soup, and I watched whatever I wanted on television, and that was one of the better evenings I'd had in recent memory. I'm not here to tell you that everything is perfect. I'm 69 years into a life with a lot of complicated threads in it, and some of them are still tangled, and maybe they'll always be. Gerald and I have children together. We have grandchildren together. There are holidays that will always have a shape to them, a history to navigate. Life doesn't clean up neatly just because you made the right decision. And some mornings I wake up and I feel the weight of all those years. Not regret exactly, more like sorrow for the woman I was, for the years that went the way they went, for all the times I shushed my own voice because someone else's comfort seemed more important than my own truth. I grieve that. I allow myself to grieve it now. That's new. But I also want to tell you what else I feel, because this is equally true. I feel like myself again. It happened slowly, slowly like something growing, almost invisible, until suddenly you notice it's there. I started telling stories again. At dinner with Celeste, at church with women I'd been sitting next to for years. And they laughed. They laughed the way people used to laugh at my stories, and something in me lit up that I had forgotten was a light. I started having opinions out loud, small ones first. What restaurant? What movie? What color I wanted to paint the little accent wall in my apartment? A deep, ridiculous, gorgeous green that I love and that Gerald would have said was too much. It is too much. I love it. I started recognizing my own moods, my own needs. It's like learning a language you used to speak and then forgot. There's a kind of reawakening in it, not always comfortable, but alive. I am more alive at 70 than I was at 60, than I was at 50. I didn't know that was possible. I started this by saying I'm not angry, and I'm not. But I want to be clear about what I am. I am awake. After a very long sleep, I am awake. And if you are somewhere in the middle of a life that has made you smaller, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I know how complicated it is. I know the children and the finances and the religion and the fear and the love and the history of it, the sheer accumulated history of a life built with someone. I know that leaving is not simple, and it is not always the answer, and I'm not standing here in my green-painted apartment pretending I have the answers for anyone but myself. But I am asking you to check in on yourself, in the quiet, when no one is watching. Ask yourself the question my doctor asked me. Are you happy? And if the answer doesn't come easily, if it takes a long time, if nothing comes at all, please sit with that. Don't explain it away. Don't add it to the pile of things you'll think about later. This is your life. It is happening right now at whatever age you are, and later is not a guarantee. At 40, you think you have time. At 60, you think you've missed it. At 70, I found out neither one was true. I didn't leave because I hated him. I left because I wanted to meet myself before I die. There was a woman in me who liked to tell stories and burn dinner and paint her walls green and take too long in the cereal aisle, and I wanted to know her. After all this time, I wanted to sit with her in a quiet room and just be her. I'm doing that now. It's strange. It's good. It's mine. Thank you for watching this channel and for staying with this story all the way to the end. I know it was long. I know I'm not a quick talker, but I think this particular story needed to breathe a little. It had been held in for long enough. If this reached you, if something here reminded you of yourself or someone you love or something you've been trying not to think about, then I'm glad I said it. That's why I said it. And if you're living something similar, please know this: you still have time. I don't know how much, neither do you, but some, still some, use it well.